Hi everybody, it's Steph from the Stellium Astrology podcast, and today I just decided to log on quickly because I've been looking at the Venus retrograde transits, the upcoming stuff, and it just got me all in my head about what's going to happen. I'm creating a little video for it soon, but yeah, it just got me thinking because it's quite a powerful, it's really powerful actually. But one of the things that really sort of stands out to me is the fact that Venus is going to be retrograde and Lilith is really close by. And Lilith makes herself known to me. she's somebody that has called me to her ever since I sort of discovered her in astrology, and I realized that I have mean Lilith in close proximity to my sun. I kind of was like, oh, what is that all about? And I just couldn't, it was like a kind of mysterious thing that I just had to keep going deeper and deeper with. Some of you guys may know that I actually did a Lilith course for the London School of Astrology and for the New Moon School in China. And I haven't created any content about it recently because I just want to like let her continue to show herself to me and to connect with her in a deeper way. I don't want to just like hash out generic stuff. But anyway, let me share my screen because let's have a quick look. Where is it? There we go. Let's pull that up. There it is. Oh, so that's when Venus turns direct. So let's just let's pull up these charts. So when Venus turns retro, so I'm doing this for UK, British summertime. On the 23rd of July, Venus is turning retrograde at 28 degrees of Leo, and Lilith is at 21 degrees. I believe I've got mean Lilith calculated. I'm just going to double check. Displayed Lilith calculations. Mean, yes. So mean. It's black moon Lilith that I'm calculating. There's a few different Liliths, which I go into when in the course that you can calculate and look at. I've looked at a variety of different expressions of Lilith, but this is the one that I feel most connected to. This is the one that speaks to me the most. So interesting that Venus is a feminine archetype and Lilith is also a feminine archetype, but she's more connected to the moon than Venus. The black moon is a calculated point, which is to do with the moon's apogee, and it's where the moon's furthest point in its orbit to the Earth. It's like a kind of calculated point that sort of skips and jumps around, which is why true Lilith is erratic. Mean Lilith is a much more stable point. It's a little bit like having true nodes or mean nodes. The nodes will move backwards and forwards, whereas the mean node, it calculates the mean point. So it's these things are all kind of like hypothetical points, like they're not really physical points, though they do hold incredible importance. And what's really interesting is that Mercury is just sitting there on top with Venus and 21 degrees, so the same degree, very close proximity to one another. And really interesting that Uranus in Taurus at 22 degrees is square to Lilith and to Mercury. So I was just looking at this and I was just thinking, wow, this is just really important. It's really important. It really gives me a feeling. If you look at like what's in Taurus, so the nodes just have moved back from Taurus and Scorpio back into Aries and Libra, which is really kind of a big deal. That's another story. But we've got Jupiter and Uranus sitting in Taurus together. And if you kind of think about Taurus, I think of Taurus, it symbolizes like the springtime to me. It's when the sun, it's when everything starts to really blossom and suddenly you're out of that kind of cold, wintry feeling and into the spring. And in the UK, it's really, really obvious. Like you hit Taurus season and suddenly there's pink blossom on the trees and just the sun is shining, everything warms up. It's just, the birds are singing. It's beautiful outside. It's criminal to sit and do an office job. And I remember every Taurus season for many years, just looking out the window, wishing I was outside or was able to be outside, closer to nature. But I kind of get a really beautiful feel about Taurus season. It's like everything is suddenly really fertile. Hence, you know, we have Taurus is a sign that's connected to fertility, ruled by Venus. So Venus rules Taurus. And what's really, I in this story, in this depiction that I'm seeing in the chart for the beginning of Venus retrograde, Uranus and Jupiter in Taurus square to Lilith kind of makes me think about Lilith's kind of banishment from the Garden of Eden. And if you guys don't really know about that, I probably should do a show on it. But in a nutshell, Lilith was the first woman, the first lady of the Garden of Eden, and she was made equally out of the dirt, just like Adam. Whereas Eve was made from Adam's ribs and stuff like that. So she was a byproduct of Adam, whereas Lilith was literally equal to Adam. But apparently when, you know, procreating, it was insisted that you had to face your creative force. And because the creative force was the earth, for both Adam and for Lilith, it was said that Lilith had to face the ground. So she was not, essentially it was, you know, facing away and from behind. And Lilith just didn't really appreciate that. She was like, I don't see why I have to be underneath. We are equals. And this was part of the battle where she ended up deciding she was going to break all the rules and leave. And I will go into more detail in another show about Lilith. So what I can see here is that Lilith is speaking her truth, because Mercury is in conjunction with Lilith. And whenever you see Lilith and Mercury together, people are sharing information which is liberating, often extremely liberating. Information which has sometimes been kept for a specific group for a very long time. I think, I'm trying to remember now if Emma Watson has got, I know she's got Lilith opposite Pluto. It's either Lilith opposite Pluto. I'm going to have to check it. Let me just check. Yes, I believe it's, oh, so it's Lilith in conjunction with Pluto opposite Mercury, and her Mercury's in Taurus. That's interesting. So it's around the degree that Jupiter is, that's where her Mercury is. And Emma Watson created the kind of the lending library, the global lending library, where she left a bunch of books written by feminists lying around the transport systems in London and New York, and probably a few other destinations as well. And the only condition was that you read the book and then you leave it to be recirculated. And that was her way of, you know, fighting against, you know, oppression of females, basically, and, you know, doing her bit for feminism, which is quite a cool thing to do. But interesting that that's how she chose to do it. It wasn't about standing on a platform and preaching about it. It was actually about helping people to discover this for themselves, actually give them the tools to access the information for themselves, so that they could free themselves through direct contact with the authors, essentially. So it was like a really interesting expression of Lilith, and it was about empowering women as well. And this is what I kind of see. I can kind of see Lilith is offering us some kind of information, empowering us in some way. And, you know, when she, you know, communicated God's name and said God's name in the Garden of Eden, which was a forbidden word to say, it meant that she was thrust out of the Garden of Eden. And this is kind of what I can see is Lilith speaks her truth. She eats this, you know, it's just an interesting story. So she speaks her truth. She gets thrust out of the Garden of Eden, and then some angels were sent after her to say, you can come back, but you have to apologize, and you have to, you know, you have to kind of be subservient in a sense. And she just said, I don't want to go back. I'm not going back. And obviously the story, Lilith's essence will vary depending on who tells the story, whether it's patriarchal, matriarchal. It's an interesting way, but I think that the way I look at Lilith, in the same way that you can look at every planet and every sign, is that they have their high vibration, their low vibration, and it's a spectrum as opposed to being like just black and white. It's this or that. So there are expressions of Lilith which, you know, picture her or depict her in a positive light, whereas there are some expressions of Lilith which put her into a rather dark and oppressive light, a fearful kind of energy. And somewhere everybody's got their own relationship with that type of energy, and somewhere on that spectrum we all find a place, and we don't have to, we're not fixed there either. We can work with it, recognize it. It's about looking at the shadow. So Lilith is almost like the shadow of the moon shadow in a sense, but she holds a lot of other feminine archetypes within her as well. If you see Venus before the sun rising in the morning, then she's waking men up for war. Whereas if you see her, if the sun rises and then she appears, if she's behind the sun, then that means she's the softer. So you'd see her setting at nighttime. So this is the two expressions of Venus, and this is the reminder that feminine archetype, that energy, that passive energy, passive, as the feminine energy is described as being passive, it's not active, and not necessarily pinned to specific genders either. By the way, that's not what we're talking about in astrology. There's a real sense of like working with a whole array of different expressions. And so, you know, this is why interpretation of a chart can vary so much, because you don't have to deal with one description of how things are in the chart. And that's why you can have people born on the same day, but everybody's working with their own chart, with their own relationship with the chart, with their own influences, with the way that they were brought up, the family culture they were born into, and their own personal relationship with their you know, their guardians, their parents, their caregivers, and the people that they meet, the authority figures that they meet going into the world. Suddenly this gives us a different lens. I've described on the podcast previously how I think sometimes with an ascendant, it's like when you go to the opticians and they place different lenses into those weird glasses until it focuses right for you. And I think that this is also can be quite descriptive of our relationship with the people who we are born to or are raised by, and where we go to school, or how we're educated, who we're educated by, the people that we associate with. Every single time it's like we get different lenses because we take on different perspectives. And this is how the chart can be so multifaceted, and even down to one planet and the multiple expressions of those planets. So what I'm trying to say in a really long-winded way is that your chart is not, you know, this is why it varies so much from person to person, from interpretation to interpretation. There'll be similarities in what's happening and how things are affecting you, but you're not going to have like a carbon copy day compared to somebody else. And this Lilith expression that I'm seeing right now is really a kind of defiant kind of expression. This Venus retrograde isn't like a soft, gentle, I don't ever feel like Venus retrograde is particularly soft and gentle. It definitely raises our awareness to inequality, to things that just aren't fair. We are given an opportunity to recalibrate, to resync ourselves, and to speak our truth if we need to about the things that we would normally compromise over, but we've done that, just that little bit too much compromising. And with Lilith in the mix, it's going to pack a bit of a punch. She's not really going to suffer fools gladly, particularly with that square to Uranus. There may be that the need to take yourself out of a situation is great, and you feel like you want to run away from something, or it could be that you want to make a big change in your life. You know, that Uranian input that we're experiencing with Mercury square Uranus, always a day, often I find, where particularly if you're Mercury ruled, or if Mercury is important in your chart, it's a very impulsive energy, and you could speak too quickly and think, oh, I should never have said that, I shouldn't have shared that secret, for example, or I, you know, shouldn't have sworn at that person. Or it could be quick decision making, like walking past a hairdressing salon and going, do you know what, I never ever did experiment with a Mohican. I'm going to go and get a Mohican and bleach it blonde today. And then suddenly not thinking about the long-term impact of those actions, particularly in Leo, of like, oh, you know, I just want to relive my younger days and just bring out that the inner punk rock energy. I do feel like Lilith is extremely, there's a lot of punk rock energy in Lilith, and she's not really conforming to a particular label. She's not really conforming to a particular identity even. She is more about the truth, and, you know, not having to wear a uniform, not having to do it by anybody else's rules. So when you put those two in square as well, it creates like an inner dialogue as well, because the square is very much an internal friction, which constantly is like a sort of a friction that creates sparks, enough so that it might inspire or ignite action. Even if Mars isn't involved, the essence of the square is Mars by nature, martial by nature. I will have to tag an episode. I did talk about the essence of the aspects, I believe, at some point. So what I'm saying is that this is a time for waking up to a part of yourself that perhaps has been suppressed, whether it's suppressed by yourself for fear of not wanting to be rejected or cancelled, or it could be that you are not able to express yourself in a way that you want to because the people around you are so conservative, or they're so overbearing and controlling that you just being who you are is too much for them. And this is a time to not give a poo about how much you are, you know, for other people. This is about being unapologetically yourself. And this is a thought process which is going to shift. And it's probably going to be a bit of a one that sort of keeps you awake at night, because you just have stuff going around in your head and you can't rest until it's expressed. It's almost like those creatives who they're awake at night because they can't sleep. They need to write that song, or they need to paint that picture. There's something, a great saying from a documentary I watched about people that make crop circles was, it requires to be done. It just requires to be done. It's like the square energy. It's like it has to be done. And with Mercury square Uranus and a bit of Lilith in the mix, it's like it can't go unsaid. It can't go unsaid. It can be said diplomatically if you want. You have to work on it. But it's not just about saying, it's about the entire process of stepping into being authentic. You know, everybody wants to use the word authentic, but really, I think that it's authenticity is about ultimately giving zero F's, basically. So not really caring what people think. It's almost like shedding that pretense that you need to fit into what people want. It can be really hard if you're working in a place where you need to you have to do things their way. You know, when you're working for other people, you have to kind of follow their rules. And to an extent these days, things are definitely a lot more accepting. People are more accepting. There's a lot more compassion for understanding that we're all different and we all have different styles of learning and communicating. And having worked previously in HR and understanding the way that workplace culture develops and evolves, it's interesting to see how people are when they get together in a certain environment where there's an authority and then there's like minions, and you have to see how they react. And it can get very school playground, or it can be you know, like a nice cooperative vibe, but these things, they develop, and over time they can go a bit toxic, a bit sour. And there's this sense that you know, it's about your relationship with the culture that you find yourself in, whether this is work, whether this is family life, it's friendships, whether it's just yourself and you're going through a process of transformation. And I suppose on that note, what is very interesting to note on the day that Venus turns retrograde is that we're looking at the nodes, like I said, around a very similar time, the nodes ingress Aries and Libra. So it will be, this is where we're going to be having Aries and Libra eclipses for the next, I'm thinking, year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And also at 29 degrees of cardinal signs, we have the Sun in Cancer and Pluto opposite in Capricorn. Now, we know from previous videos that I've made, and anybody who's kind of in tune with the astrological weather of recent years, Pluto's been in Capricorn since about 2008, so a very long time, and he dipped into Aquarius back in March, and he's now back in Capricorn. So he's got a little bit of work to tie up loose ends, unfinished business. There's a little bit more to get done, and he will, I believe, dip back in again at some point, I think possibly in 2024. Where's my ephemeris? There it is. No, we've got him dipping back in again, but it just means there's just a few bits to do. Yes, October 2024, he dips back into Capricorn again, and then out again into Aquarius. He's only there for a very short period. So from October to November, he dips back in one last time, and then that's it. He's in Aquarius until 2044. So this is like the last, he's kind of going over the last few things he has to do. But to pack a punch and to really shine a light on some of the stuff that I guess we're going to have to process, vocalize, and integrate, is that the Sun is at 29 Cancer, creating an opposition which shines a light on some of the more taboo subjects, the things that we just don't want to touch, we don't want to look at, we don't want to talk about, for fear of being cancelled or being rejected, being treated as though we have you know, done something unforgivable. You know, Pluto can create. Now, what did I watch? I watched the Luther film, and I don't want to be a spoiler alert person, but there is a spoiler alert coming. The guy who was perpetrating the horrible crimes, it kind of reminded me a bit of Hostel, did so. If you don't want to know, mute me and I'll tell you when to unmute. Yes, he was the guy that was perpetrating the crimes, essentially was using their own shame by spying on them. So they were doing things like finding people that were watching porn, and you know, finding people that had secrets like gambling addictions and things that they just didn't want their families to find out about, by spying on their webcams, watching them and looking at their search histories and stuff. So in a sense, this feels a bit like that. It's a little bit like putting a spotlight on the things that we don't really want people to see. And then with the nodes in the a square, so we've got like a grand cardinal cross, which involves all of the elements. You know, we've got fire, water, air, and earth. It creates a tension. Now, you normally you would call it with the nodes, you wouldn't call that a grand cardinal cross. However, there is some sort of power with the nodes being there, and there's a sort of tension that these things are called moon wobbles, or you know, they are wobbles where things align with the nodes, And usually there's really interesting stories in the news when these things come out. It's possible we're going to hear more about Partygate in the UK, with the Conservative government holding parties while everybody was in lockdown, and people were saying goodbye to their loved ones because they were dying from either a lack of access to healthcare during lockdown or through coronavirus. And yeah, it's, you know, the sign of Cancer, you know, it kind of is about like the collect, like when I say the collective, it's, if you think about the moon in a mundane chart, it represents the people, so like the people versus. So it could well be this highlights us versus the people who are abusing their power right now. And then with this moon wobble, that actually it's got Pluto and the sun there, it's like a shift. It's an opportunity to shift. And yeah, it feels like Lilith in square to Uranus with Mercury involved. It's like an activist vibe who just doesn't want to settle. They don't want to settle down and accept things. It raises the intolerance levels. It's sort of off the scale because Uranus is not particularly tolerant. Everyone thinks that Uranus or Aquarius is a tolerant sign, but actually the sign and the planet, so Aquarius and Uranus, do not tolerate things that they see as, you know, it's very progressive. They want to be progressive, and they don't want to tolerate inequality or the things that just they can't stand for anymore. So that's where the intolerance comes in with those. And Lilith doesn't tolerate being anything less than equal. So there's a real fiery sense of not standing there and keeping your mouth shut. In fact, it's time to speak up. So it could well be that there is a bit of an interesting period ahead as Venus turns retrograde, because there's a lot to be said. There's a lot more to be uncovered, which is going to trigger that. And, you know, look, we've got Chiron as well. Chiron is feeding in by trine as well. So Chiron is essentially part of this conversation as well. It's about maybe voicing, you know, the fact that we've lost our autonomy over the past few years, and we are not able to stand up for ourselves as easily as perhaps we previously could. I think about Chiron in Aries very much about losing our individual power during the pandemic and not being able to exercise our freedom, or even just exercise full stop, because we were only allowed to go outside for an hour a day or something. And that was if you were lucky enough to have some outside space that you could actually go outside for longer. So yeah, it's like a really interesting time, because there's a lot of pain that's going to be expressed. And though we can't heal that pain and that suffering that's occurred, we can perhaps at least try and get some kind of closure and put it behind us. You can never heal some wounds. Some wounds will always be there. You know, it's the thing about loss and grief is that you can't ever replace what's gone. But in a sense, you can celebrate it once you've got over the initial shock. You can plant a garden, a memorial, and you can watch new life grow through it, and you can make peace with some of the memories that you have, and understand the cyclic nature of life. And whether you are experiencing like grief that needs to be expressed, or if you're experiencing some kind of pain or injustice which is injuring you in a way that is affecting your ability to be truly confident and express yourself as the whole person that you are here and growing into, that holistic expression of you. This is a time where we are going to connect with an aspect of our voice that maybe we do try to subdue and to turn the volume down, because we don't like to rock the boat. Doesn't bode well to rock the boat. And as always is the case, galactic center is at 27 degrees. When I was born, it was at 26. You know, it's a very, very slow moving point. This feels very much in alignment where the nodes, the node in Aries sitting at 29, Venus retrograde at 28 of the fire signs. So I'll just, for those listening, galactic centers at 27 Sag. This, whenever things connect up with the galactic center, there's something almost otherworldly about our sense of what's right and wrong. And we are in contact with something that is almost, it channels through us as humanity as a whole, and individually, if it feeds into your chart individually as well. There's something pure, honest, and almost a sense of calm that can be carried through this period, like a righteousness that it is as it should be, the way that things are unfolding. So we have confidence that we can be truly ourselves because we are acting on behalf of our higher consciousness. We are in tune with what is right, that's beyond any kind of rational, physical, earthly expression, and actually in tune with our soul's journey, not just as an individual, but actually as humanity, as a collective force. So I just really wanted to look at Venus retrograde and just talk about the initial chart that she turns retrograde, because it's got a lot of promise. And, you know, by the time she's finished doing what she does, Mercury is retrograde. In fact, I can just skip. Let's just open up these three charts quickly. So we've got Venus turns direct, and let's swap 2 for 3. So we've got the Venus conjunct Sun. So when she's actually, when Venus is Cazimi, which means she's in the heart of the Sun, which almost like is a purifying force. This then cleanses her, and we have Mercury and Mars in close contact to one another as well. So an interesting, oh yes, and the other thing was that the moon is in Cancer as well. So again, it echoes that the people versus, and you know, like there's multiple expressions, but it definitely feels like there's a sense of a healing, a nurturing kind of essence that's going to come from this. And it feels to me, it feels really like it's going to have a huge impact. Venus retrograde, I personally think it's a time where lots of stuff happens. It's a big deal. It does feel to me to be a very big deal, because Venus retrograde is like, with Mercury retrograde, it happens quite regularly, 3 or 4 times a year. It's not something that happens that frequently. It happens like maybe once every sort of 1.5 to 2 years. We'll have Venus turn retrograde. There's just a bit more upheaval. There usually feels like there's a lot more that we have to work through. And Venus and Mars, in my opinion, are all about checking in with what we value and giving us an opportunity to check what we really care about, check what's really important. Venus is what we value. Mars is what we're going to give our energy to. So ultimately, we don't want to waste our time or our energy doing things that aren't really in tune with those things. They're very important, hence the personal planets. They form part of our own mission in this life. So it's a big deal. There's just a lot, I feel a lot at the moment of in this transit of feminine energy, passive, but tuning into vocalizing discrepancies where we would normally sound them out. We would normally turn the volume down on them and just smile and compromise and just allow these things to pass. It's just not that time anymore. I seem to be disappearing into the light. So let's, here I am. I'm not turning into a light being anymore. I think maybe that's to do with galactic center. But yes, so I just really wanted to just get on and just talk about it, because I just found myself really intrigued by what I was seeing, and rather than scribbling stuff down on paper and just thinking, oh, I'll remember that and I'll talk about it, I thought, why not just do a separate episode just discussing it. So yeah, this is when Venus turns direct. The Sun is at 11 Virgo and Mercury is at 15, making his way back to Cazimi as well. So I think Mercury turns retrograde on the 23rd of August, so a month after Venus turns retro, and Mercury turns direct on the 15th of September. Venus turns direct on the 4th of September. So they're kind of tag teaming. And there's obviously going to be lots more to say. Look at that. On the day that Venus turns direct, Mercury is trine to Jupiter. And it's a nice, and look, Venus is square as well. So I think that it's these two are working hand in hand for an unfolding process. The other thing I thought was interesting was that when she turns direct, Venus turns direct, in the UK, 28 Cancer is rising, and in the UK, when she turned retrograde, the Sun was at 29 Cancer. So puts Pluto in powerful points each time. However, if you're in another part of the world, Pluto's not going to be setting for you. It'll be in a different position. But there's a lot of planets like Neptune, and not necessarily planet, but the node, the North Node and the South Node, both being in the late degrees of Aries and Libra. Lilith cruising her way through Leo and making her way to close to the final degrees of Leo as well. So there's a lot of it's very like, it feels like a mature process where we've been through a lot with some of these planets that are sitting at the later degrees, and we're working with them all the time, and we're ready to sort of level up. And this is I feel like this is a leveling up retrograde. So interesting times. Anyway, I hope just this little chat about it was interesting to you. I will have a follow-up video for you guys quite soon with Venus in the signs, because I think that there's a lot to be said for her expression through the 12 signs, and hopefully you also will find it interesting. I just wanted to look at her particular relationship with Lilith. And if you'd like to be in with a chance of winning a gorgeous Monk's Astrology personalized birth chart or birth chart clock, all you have to do is subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you have a private channel, screenshot your subscription and email it. And if you just include your YouTube handle as well, so tell me what your channel is called, just so that if for whatever reason, you know, I do pull your name out the hat, I can hunt you down in a few different ways to let you know you won this beautiful clock made by the very talented Catherine Monks, who creates a variety of bespoke and personalized astrological ornamental artwork, and it really is truly stunning with Austrian crystals. It's such a beautiful little gift, or just something to have around your home. I have a clock for myself, and it really is a beautiful thing. So hope you enjoyed it, and I will be following up with some Venus retrograde horoscopes as soon as possible. Right guys, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.